By way of brief introduction, we are so thrilled to be both buddies with Dee and one of the co-sponsors today. At Rich Talent Group, we focus on building diverse and inclusive teams. We're headquartered in San Francisco with an office here as well in New York. You'll see a few of my colleagues are here with us today. And one of the things that we're probably most proud of, honestly, is that the teams that we've built, over 70% of people on the operating level bring diversity to those teams. And at the board, it's almost 100%. There's really been only one exception in the entire time that we've been in business that it has not been a woman or person of color. So it's something we are deeply committed to, and we're thrilled to be here today. You heard sort of brief introductions from Dee of each one of our panelists, and really we want to kind of jump into the meat of it. But I'll just mention, and they'll weave in, I'm sure, a little bit of their own personal stories. But you have on the panel two people who've been founders, and that's Ty next to me, and Keisha as well. You have two people on the panel who are with, I'll call them sort of major corporations, and that is Keisha, who's got two hats today, as well as Jocelyn. You've got Tony, who's working with a very high growth company. So it's wonderful when you have, our joke is that we're the largest panel today, so there's a lot that we're gonna try to cover, and you've got some really wonderful and different perspectives from everyone on the panel. So thank you to each and every one of you for being here today. The way we're going to structure it is, please start thinking, because when you think about building teams, we've heard founders say over and over again, if I build the right teams in the right ways, it's one of the key indicators of success. So I'm going to guess that there'll be a lot of questions, so please start teeing them up. Because we've tried to be pretty focused. We've agreed upon sort of 4 questions we'll ask each other today to kind of get the conversation started. But then we really do want to have each and every one of you participate, because we want to make sure it's as actionable as possible. So for each one of the questions, I'm going to sort of call on one of our panelists, but if others want to chime in, please feel free. And Jocelyn has sort of the first question, which is, when you think about all of us being committed to building diverse and inclusive teams, and that many of you in the room are starting to build teams in the relatively early stages of development, how do you set the groundwork for teams that will ultimately end up being diverse and inclusive over time?
That's a great question and a great place to start. But first, let me say I'm really glad to be here. There's a lot of love in this room and a lot of folks in this room who I know in their current capacities, but also in their prior capacities. So it makes it an easier question for me to answer from the standpoint of the moment I stepped off the elevator, I ran into someone who was very dear to me, who I don't see very often. And it sort of underscored or helped me to develop my response to this question, which is, you know, I think when you're on the outside, it's important to maintain your relationships on the inside, because that mix of inside-outside is really critical. So the person I ran into who almost brought me to tears when I hugged her when I got here is Tanya Van Court. And Tanya, for those of you who don't know her in this room, she's the bomb, but she was my colleague at Nickelodeon. She made a decision that she was going to leave and go do something else. We kept in touch, and then she, you know, shared with me over dinner that she was going to start this business. And her, you know, the father of her children, her ex-husband, was in the market looking for a job. And so the role that I played in that instance was to ensure that he, you know, was able to do that at a role of interest to him in the Viacom family of companies. So I think it's maintaining internal, external, and then also resisting the urge to have completely homogenous networks. So whether that's by, you know, function, role, color, you know, where you are in your career. You know, heterogeneous networks are important to all, but certainly to us as women and women of color. So, you know, again, I was invited here today by Jana. Jana and I met many years ago in her search career, hadn't seen each other in forever. Someone else made the connection, and immediately I said yes. So I think it's just maintaining internal, external relationships, leveraging the people, you know, from your former careers, people you meet on your entrepreneurial journey, as well as, you know, resisting the urge that everyone should be exactly like you.
Yeah. I would add one quick tactical note is in the interview process, particularly as you're looking for leaders in your company, I like to specifically ask, what have you done to further the diversity efforts in your organization? How have you built diverse teams? What does that mean to you? Because I do think the more you can have advocates in a real, they feel it, and they're on the leadership team and they're advocates for diversity and inclusion, that is going to take you a long way. And it's never too early to start with that. Alex, our co-founder, is in fact that advocate internally, and because it's been there from the beginning, I remember my second day, she's like, you might want to think about adding your pronouns to your Slack channel profile. It's little nudges like that where she organically sort of does that, and it is very organically ingrained in our culture because it started from day one.
That's a great point. Casting and hiring for values, right? What do people value? And asking them in the interview process to demonstrate those values through prior experiences.
I don't know if you knew that, Jocelyn, but that's a perfect segue. The next question, which was teed up for Ty, was, and we heard it a little bit with Thasunda this morning about the importance of culture, that at the end of the day, it all comes back to culture. We also know, and I don't know if people have heard this phrase, but it's not really about culture fit, because that gets risky sometimes in terms of just finding the same DNA, basically, but it is about shared values, which is what Jocelyn just mentioned. So right. Ty, if you wouldn't mind just at least kicking it off for us in terms of how do you hire for the right shared values?
Yes, and I just first want to echo the sentiment about the love in the room. Yeah. Totally feeling it. This is amazing. So hiring for culture fit. So first, I would say this. When on the question about making sure that your team is diverse, I think that's number one. You have to start from the very beginning. When you think about hiring, and I've been doing a talk on marketing and advertising at the intersection of diversity, there tend to be a lot of white people in the room. And I think part of the challenge is having people really understand and get connected to what's possible. I know that we all get it, but the way I break it down is, one, you want to make sure, first of all, that you have a team that can accomplish whatever goal you set to achieve. However, when you start adding, and in particular for entrepreneurs, the early hires make a massive difference for the trajectory or the pace of your business. So you want to be thinking about, where are my blind spots and how do I add people that strengthen my team over time, right? And so I work for LinkedIn, I lead our market development group. I think my team is one of the strongest in the business because of the diversity of our team. So I want to make sure my team's a living, breathing example of that power. So back to culture, one of the things I think we often skip over, because maybe it seems fluffy, is really defining the culture, what you stand for, who are you, what are the values, what's the mission, what's the vision. So I hope that most of you have already done that, but for some it does seem like kind of a fluffy thing to do, but is actually one of the most important defining steps, because as more people join your business, people forget what is the point of why we're all here. And with each person that gets added, that message can get diluted. So defining your culture, your values is incredibly important. There's a framework called Vision to Values. So if you Google Vision to Values, there's a number of different examples of how this is done. And think of it like this. When NASA is launching a rocket, if you're a couple inches off in trajectory, you're like, oops, I missed Jupiter, right? So this is about making sure that no matter how many people get added, how it evolves, that you're constantly on that track and everyone's connected to the why are we doing this? What is our purpose? Yeah.
Anyone else want to jump in on that one?
Oh, am I on? Yep. The one thing I'll add is I think about values as the how we do what we do. Like what's allowed, what's within our rules, our rules of engagement, or the way that we are going to operate with each other. And so when I'm interviewing, I'm often asking people about, tell me about a time when you had to get something over the line. How did you get buy-in? How did you go about that? Tell me about the last day at work that you felt incredibly fulfilled. Why was that, right? Because what I'm trying to get at is their hierarchy of values, right? And what they prioritize, and whether or not they prioritize how something gets done or only that it does get done. What I'm learning, particularly in a small team, the values piece almost is exponentially, not more important, but becomes so critical, because every single person, if you don't have, I don't like to say the same values, but if you don't have aligned values, your ability to rely on each other to get things done is impacted. And on a small team, you don't have that luxury. So a lot of times, to your point, people say values feel fluffy. I think the most tangible way to think about it is it's about the how, right? How do we do what we do, and what's allowable in our culture? Yeah.
Next up is Tony. And Tony, sort of a two-pronged question, really. So the first of it is, if I'm starting to build my senior level team for the first time, how do I think about which hires to prioritize first? And then the second part of the question, coming back to sort of the how, is how do I attract a C-level executive, but when I really have startup compensation?
You pray. I don't know. A lot. So it's a good question, what role do you pick first? And I would love to say, the rule tells you don't hire your CFO, your COO till you're past the Series A. There's some standard sort of things out there that are considered rules, but I think when you're really thinking about it, it's more about where is, and I heard blind spot, where's your weakness? Where do you not gain any energy from? And I'll give you an example of that with our two co-founders. So Catherine is very energized by raising money, external speaking. She gets incredible press hits, as she has been very instrumental in building our brand at the Muse. Alex is very operational. She gets deep in something. She taught herself how to code. She's the first person to build the platform. She's very passionate about the product. Together, they're a perfect skill set combination, but more importantly, the reason they got into business together is because they also shared the same values around building a culture that was very respectful and inclusive, coming out of the consultancy world and feeling some pains around corporate America and what that culture could be like. And so I guess what I'm saying is, try to find where you are, if you like the investing and being external, find the person who is internal that's going to also address the thing that you want to take on as your next level. So if you're trying to get to the next hump in revenue, that is when you're going to need a more experienced hire. And so it's looking for those milestones. There was at some point when we were coming in, we had to switch our revenue leadership, and that was because we were heading for the next milestone and they didn't have the expertise anymore. And it's good, it's mutual, it's all good, still friends, but that looking for your complement and really being honest with yourself. And that is hard, right? Because you're a founder, you're like, I can do anything, and you are doing everything. But there is a point when you have to sit back and say, I'm not very operational, or like this part could be better if I actually had someone who was really good at it and got their energy from it. In terms of the compensation, I think it's keep networking. People will follow you if they have to fall in love with what you're doing. Be really clear on the why. I love the vision statement. People want to solve really tough problems. People ask me all the time, how do you motivate teams? Well, you motivate teams by being really clear on the problem you are trying to solve. People want to solve problems and they want to win. And even if they don't win, again, solving that problem, they want to feel like they're making progress. Progress is the #1 thing that causes people to be happy. If you're not making progress in life, you're not happy. And so people want to feel like they are helping you solve a problem. So that is part of it, being really clear about that. But then also equity. You're probably going to get at the C-level, they're going to ask for some acceleration upon exit in some sort of event for their equity, but making sure that they have some significant skin in the game once you trust them and you're at a good spot, potentially starting off with a freelance type role if you can, and then moving into full-time will reduce the risk on your end. But working with any of the lawyers that I'm sure you're already working with, or bankers, they'll give you some advice on sort of the nuts and bolts of hiring at the C-level in terms of the compensation. But it's really all about the mission and the passion, and you will have to pay more for them, yes. Yep.
And to your point about progress and how it resonates with people, people also really want to belong. And, working in a founder-led company often gives you the opportunity to belong in a way that you may not always find at a, 20, 50, 100,000 person company, particularly if you've already done that. So I think to your point, it's also just aligning and identifying people at the right time in their life, in their career, to go on that journey with you.
Just two little ones. So, because I'm in the middle of this right now, so two things have been helpful to me. One is probably a couple months ago, we sat together as a team and did the vision. Like, I obviously had to get clear on the vision, and then we worked our way from 2022 to today. What has to happen? What has to become true in order to make our vision come true in 2022? And what became really clear is probably 80% of the things that had to materialize were directly related to marketing. So for my, a consumer product good, so it isn't surprising necessarily, but that exercise really crystallized for me that the CMO hire, in whatever form that is, whether it's outsourcing to a company or having somebody full time or getting a consultant. In terms of your question about knowing when you need to make that big hire, I think doing that vision exercise is not just for the values piece, but it's also for you to get clarity on who are the doers that need to be in place for you to be able to get to whatever the next critical revenue milestone is or profitability milestone. That's number one. Two, from a tactical standpoint, I've done every flavor of compensation mix. So I've done, I've hired somebody and had them start at a certain rate, and then we agreed when we hit a certain revenue milestone, we had like 3 milestones, and I increased comp along the way. I've done consultant only. I've hired somebody who has a full-time job, and we're just, paying hourly. I've given away probably more.
Have you done hibiscus for life?
I've done hibiscus, all the applesauce you can eat for the rest of your life. And I've also probably had to give away more equity because I, have a full-time job and had to hire senior people sooner. So one thing I've learned is that there is no formula. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to hire the CFO and COO before Series A, right? But you really have to think about your particular scenario, your strengths, your challenges and opportunities, and then customize your team and the compensation to go with it. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask one last final question, at least for the broad panel. So please start thinking about questions you might have. And I'm actually going to ask each one of you to comment on this one briefly. And Keisha, I'm going to start with you and honestly kind of flip to the other side of your brain. So meaning Keisha was just talking about her perspective as a founder. This is, I think, a little bit more relevant to the perspective of Tory Burch. And then again, I'm going to ask each one of the rest of you to answer this question. But we've talked a lot about building a team, recruiting a team, setting the right groundwork. This question is almost the opposite side of that equation, which is how do you retain and develop and motivate a team to stay with you over the long haul?
Yep. So I have done actually a lot of work in this space, and the reason why the role at Tory Burch in particular was so exciting to me because that is exactly the problem, the challenge that they wanted to solve for in bringing me on. And so what I've narrowed down to essentially is at the end of the day, people stay because of the leader and whether the leader is someone that they feel inspired to follow. And interestingly enough, when people think about, what makes a leader someone that others will follow, it really does come down to very basic competencies around do you do what you say you're going to do? Are you someone that has their back? Are you someone that makes them feel like whatever it is, however they see their potential manifesting, that you actually are playing a role in helping that potential manifest? And to your point, have you set a clear vision for where the team is going to go? In practice, all of those things in the middle of the stress of raising money or getting the site up or whatever the various challenges are, whether it's as a founder or as an executive in a large company, they sound easy and simple, but it is very hard to do all of those things consistently when you have the weight of the team. And so, a lot of the things that I've done in my career are really support managers in their ability to remain focused on those 5 things. So that would be my advice.
Jocelyn, would you like to go next?
No, actually. I mean, Keisha, you said it all. I mean, people, they leave a manager or leader and an environment. So, as you're, the tough part when you're a founder and you're building a company is you are playing multiple roles, and it's hard to do all 5 of those things at the same time. But while all 5 should be happening, I think 2 of the most important in a world where you're, constantly pivoting and multitasking is to do what you say you're going to do, and to continually keep their interest in mind. Keeping their interest in mind can be subtle. It can be as subtle as bringing whatever you're working on, the reason you're asking them not to go on vacation, the reason you're asking them to stay late, the reason you're, whatever you're asking them to do is to tie it back to something they value and to be prepared to deliver on it.
Ty?
Yes. So all of this, yes. And I like to look at the whole person. So I understand that they have a life outside of the wonderful work they're doing. I want to understand what are your dreams, what are your goals? At LinkedIn, we have a philosophy called Next Play. So I don't expect for that person to stay with me forever. Of course, that'd be amazing because they're amazing people, but I actually want to know, where do you want to be 5 years, 10 years, and how can I help you set up for whatever that next play is. So for example, there's a woman on my team, so we work in market development, we have a team of teachers. I'm a teacher at heart. I want them to learn something that's going to help them set up for the new thing. She's very interested in entertainment and music, so I'm like, okay, you love what you're doing now, but how do we get you there? We decided together, oh, she wants to put together a blog. She wants to start shooting video. So even inside of the OKRs that we have set up for our goals at work, I have space for her to also work on some of these other things. And so as much as I can, I try to teach her what I know. I have a marketing background. So that looking at that whole person and developing them that way, and knowing that they're not going to be there forever, but they might come back to you if they love you, though. So keep that in mind, too.
Tony, any last comments before we open it up for questions?
I mean, all of that. I mean, the next play is really, I believe in that. I don't think retention long-term is the goal. I think your goal is to give them what they need from you in the process. What are they adding to their resume? How is whatever they're going to get while they're with you, getting them on to the next phase in their life. I think that's the best way to motivate and retain people. I also think to develop people, it does not cost a ton of money. It requires creative problem solving. So find the person that is the best creative problem solver, tell them the skill gap you're trying to fix, and they'll fix it. People will train each other. There's a lot you can find on Google nowadays. So,
and then I would just say to that point as well, succession planning is so important, because while you're the founder and you're playing all the roles that you're playing today, you may not want to play them forever. And I think there's an opportunity for us, all of us in this room, and the current and next generation of founders and entrepreneurs to be better at that. We are in varying places with respect to succession and planning for it. And we all can think about people who've kind of stayed too long, and didn't groom the next generation. And so, to your point, if you're grooming folks knowing that they leave, as you continue to grow, if your business still, resonates with them from a values perspective, there's nothing to say that they'll come back. They won't come back, but also they'll be an ambassador for you, for others. So the succession planning, I would say, is super important.
Turning over to you guys. Yeah. Question over there?
Excellent panel. Again, Viola, co-founder and president of Amba. There is a rather unpleasant thing that tends to happen to some of us female founders when you go from the seeds to the A to the B and the C stage. What advice from an HR and personal development standpoint would you provide when once those big money's rolling and they start saying, no, you're not really the one that can take this to where it needs to be, and you might think otherwise? What are the tools that a woman can pulled together from an HR standpoint to preserve her position with what she built if she doesn't want to leave?
That's interesting. So, I mean, a couple of things came to mind as you said that. One is the first thing that came to mind was ego, meaning I wonder sometimes as you get that message, as someone gets that message, is there a moment for introspection about are you the person to take it to the next level? And by the way, what does it mean to take it to the next level? Is what the folks who are investing from a capital standpoint, do you guys have the same definition of what it means to take it to the next level? Because I think sometimes that's where the disconnect is. One thing that I'm learning just from when I was at News Corp and I was part of the acquisition committee, investors will have a very clear idea of where they see that company going. And I don't know that that's always a overt and clearly defined conversation that's happening at the time of investment. And I think, in other words, my point is all money isn't good money, right? And so thinking about whether or not you've accepted funding from someone who shares the same vision as you, who sees your value, who wants to take the company in the same place, which can be tough when you have capital constraints. But and also, I guess, in addition to your capital partners, who are your that advisory board, which sometimes are one and the same. But I would certainly encourage, I think it's really important for us, and I did it at the very early stages of getting a trusted board of advisors who aren't invested in the company, that you could bounce that off of, right? Because it could be a moment for introspection, i.e. maybe I don't have the skill to take it to the next level, but it also could be this isn't the right capital play for me, right? Because we don't share the same vision about where we're taking the company. So those are just a couple of things that came to mind. Yeah.
I will also say just one quick follow-on, which is it's relatively unusual. We worked with hundreds of founders and startups. It's relatively unusual for investors who are trying to get you to take their money, for them to say to you, we're questioning whether you're the right person to take it forward. And as horrible as that might be to hear, the one thing I would say is that's honest and real. And you can, again, choose that they're not the right partner because of it. But I've seen way too many examples of I'll, look you in the eye and say, I've got your back. Mm-hmm. And then 6 months later, they've basically done all the machinations to get you out without being straight to your face. Mm-hmm. The second quick point I would make, because you sort of, at least I heard sort of an allusion to the economics of that, right? And we can obviously get into more detail. I'm happy to talk to you more offline. But if they actually ended up replacing you, your equity stake in the company remains the same. So typically it's, well, I'll say it this way. You have the negotiating leverage. Maybe I should say it that way. To say, look, if there's a leadership transition, let's talk about that if you're open to it. But financially, that's a whole different conversation, right? Like, my equity is my equity. Like, that's what I would say from a negotiating perspective. But again, I know there's a lot more nuance to it than that, and happy to follow up with you.
That's exactly right. I think it's the message as well as the messenger. So who is this entity that's giving you the feedback, and how do you value it? What are your other options? And I think this is where the importance of being a great negotiator and or having great negotiators on your side is super important.
The question here.
This is actually for you.
Yes.
I'm Cherise Hawkins. I'm the CEO and founder of PageDip. Since we're getting really real, I want to understand what are the trends you're seeing in the percentage of equity that C-level people are getting? Because no one wants to talk about it. It's case by case basis. But getting real, what does that range look like for CTO, for CFO when you're bringing them on at the next phase?
I will also say the truth, and the real answer is it depends so dramatically on what stage you're at as a company, how much revenue, when is profitability likely, who exactly are the investors, are they considered to be so I'm not trying to divert from the question, but I would say these are the kinds of things, in all seriousness, feel free to follow up with me offline. But let me try to give you some concrete things to hold on to. Let's say, on average, you're a Series B company. You've got something that would be considered, call it, A to B tier kinds of investors. So they're really, top flight investors. And the reason why that's important for anyone who been through that, is the perception, right or wrong, is that the risk has been de-risked a bit if you get a XYZ great investor behind you, right? So in that example, you would probably see the founder would still have something in the realm of 5 to 7% of the company. Your top, call it 3 or 4 people, and that's typically your CTO, it's probably your head of sales, it's, if you have one yet, a CFO, you may not have one yet. But those, and these are not COOs, these are not presidents, so these are not people who are broad across a whole bunch of functions, but they're owning one really critical, mission critical function, are typically around, call it 1.5 to 2% of the company. So I don't know if that's helpful, but again, I would just say that's a specific moment I'm capturing because I think it might be relevant to some of you, but if it's A versus C versus D, obviously it will change pretty dramatically over the course of time.
Hi, I'm Sheree Robinson, founder of Tastemakers Africa. My question is around shifts. You know, you start a company, maybe you bring on a senior level person. So in my case, I brought on sort of a late joining co-founder because I was about to pivot and I was like, I can't keep being Sheree Inc. and Tastemakers also. And what do you do when you bring in sort of a senior level person, but for some reason, the utility diminishes? Maybe in that moment you really needed this thing, and in another moment it's not shaping up. Is it your job as the CEO to like figure out utility for the people you hire? Should it grow organically? Or if you kind of have a hunch that like the utility has passed, how do you broker that?
Tony, maybe? I don't know, I'm just guessing you might have seen some of that storyline.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky situation to be in. I think that the first thing is to have real open conversation and transparent conversation on a regular basis. And if the utility is gone, it's gone. But I think looking for other skill sets they have where they might be able to contribute and reinvent whatever they're doing is a way to first think about it. But if in fact that's not going to work for them and it's not going to work for you, potentially financially or otherwise, then you have to talk about parting ways and doing that in an empathetic and fair way to them, depending on whatever expectations you set up in the beginning of that conversation, both financially and responsibility wise. That's my.
Yeah, I'll just add, I've been there as a founder and found that, I mean, we want to be successful. That means managing your budget, managing your money, managing your time, managing your energy. And it was one of the hardest conversations I had to have with this person because she was a lovely person, but the value was amazing up front, but then it diminished over time and it just became too much. So I think the empathy is a really important part of it. I think if you have a constructive conversation, because initially I tried to find a place for her to be, but it just didn't work out. And so we had an honest conversation and it worked out, so we're still friends to this day and we still connect and work together in a different capacity. But yes, I think it's a tough decision. The other thing I would say is everyone, like when you are running a business, your goal is to, like you said, ultimately work on it, not in it. So you don't want to be, I don't want to be Ty Heath Inc. like forever, right? So the other thing I would say in preparation for those moments, like we should, and I'm also coming from the space of learning and development, we should be documenting everything and building systems. And when these people step into these roles, that is one of the first things you can have them do. How do you do this? And have that refined over time. You always have it. So you have training videos, you have documentations of all the processes. So if that person needs to step away, or if you have to pivot into outsourcing that instead or find a lower cost option, you have all of those details already.
Unfortunately, we have to wrap. We could go on forever. Thank you so much, you guys. Such a pleasure. Really appreciate it.